Hi, welcome back to the series I'm doing called Maladaptive Daydreaming, and where I look at different topics related to maladaptive daydreaming. I struggled with this condition for about 30 years before I had it diagnosed as OCD, so there's a lot of topics around it that I find really interesting, and I thought I would kind of go through and discuss them one by one. Today I'm going to be talking about maladaptive daydreaming and parasocial relationships. So parasocial relationships are where you have like a one-sided relationship with, it could be somebody in real life, but it's maybe more likely to be a celebrity or, somebody in the public eye. Now, parasocial relationships are normal and they're experienced by a lot of people. So it's not something that is unique to maladaptive daydreaming, but it's something that is more intense if you're a maladaptive daydreamer. So even if you maladaptive daydream, you might have certain people that you would have a healthy parasocial relationship with, and then you will have an unhealthy one if you use those people in your daydreams. So the reason why it's so intense and kind of like multiplied by 100 when you're a maladaptive daydreamer, because obviously if you need people for your fantasies, you're like prone to daydream, you're prone to creating stories, you're prone to like creating your own world in your head. You need characters to populate that, or you need, people are filling a role that you need to be playing out in your mind all the time. So obviously celebrities are like characters just already there, kind of half formed, ready for you just to take and incorporate and use as part of your stories. So although parasocial relationships are something normal, they're obviously can be a really intense thing for people who maladaptive daydream, and it can kind of feel like they might get out of control and just feel really, really intense. So obviously if we maladaptive daydream, we are kind of trying to meet needs that we have, or we're trying to create a safe world that we can control, that's different from how we are in the real world. So if we're doing this all the time and we're using a celebrity in there, it's quite normal that that parasocial relationship with that celebrity is going to feel very intense, because you've created a whole world around them, and like, although it's not real, it will feel real in a sense, and it is obviously going to impact how you feel about that person just in general. So I have always been very prone to parasocial relationships. I use celebrities a lot in my daydreams, and I think even at one point when I first was sort of looking to seek help for maladaptive daydream without even having that term, I kind of identified the problem as being an issue with a parasocial relationship. That's actually the first thing I probably spoke about in therapy that was somewhat related to my maladaptive daydreaming, but I didn't have the words to explain it. So the therapist was kind of like, we take interest in celebrities because they're living certain lives that we want, and it must be revealing something. Like, I couldn't explain actually what I was doing in my head, and that I was creating this world and like creating this relationship, and that is what was causing the problem. It can feel just very, very intense and like such an issue. Like that felt to me at that time like that was my main issue, and I didn't know how to explain the maladaptive daydreaming. It did seem to me like that around that time I kind of identified the parasocial relationship as being the problem. And I think the issue with using celebrities in daydreams is that you're constantly being fed like that celebrity is going to be doing things in real life. You're going to be keeping track of that in real life and then feeding it into your daydreams. That's kind of what I was doing, and it's really unhealthy, and that's what makes it difficult, I think, to stop and difficult to get over. And that is why when you're trying to stop maladaptive daydream, it's really important to not engage with those triggers that would set you off, or like would let you see that person. And it's funny because I used to go from like one obsession to another, like kind of one intense parasocial relationship to another intense parasocial relationship, and I didn't understand why that was happening. I was kind of like, oh wow, like this is such a coincidence, this keeps happening. But I didn't realize, it's like my need to maladaptive daydream was making me need somebody to fill that role. So it's kind of like it wasn't just a coincidence that I kept finding somebody that I felt intense about. It was that my mind actually needed somebody to fill that role if my interest in something else was waning. So I think it's really common to use celebrities, and it's really common to use TV shows and movies. Like we see things, and because of the way our mind works, it's like we put ourselves in there, or we can kind of very quickly fall into an intense obsession with things where we can take what we see and create something completely new of it, and then we'll be repeating that story over and over and over again and creating lots of different stories, and it's really difficult to stop. And it's kind of like you're a fan of something, but you're also in a more intense situation with that person as well, and it is difficult to explain. And like the point is that parasocial relationships, like healthy people can have them as well, and you can have them in a healthy way. Like for example, Taylor Swift is somebody I would say, because I listen to her music a lot, and because she's so honest and revealing with her lyrics, I think people who listen to Taylor Swift, and myself included, you can't help but feel like in a parasocial bond to her in a sense, because it's like, oh, I know how you would feel about this. Oh, I know you wrote that song, so this must be exciting. You can know that person really well. And Taylor Swift is somebody that I would say I have a healthy, normal parasocial relationship with, and a lot of other people do. That's why people got so excited that she was getting married, because it's like we've listened to her music and we know how exciting that is for her. So I think for me, I would say that's perfectly healthy and perfectly normal, because certain artists are going to give so much of themselves, and artists can reveal themselves through their music and through what they talk about. So you will feel a certain kind of bond with them, or a certain understanding with them, and that's normal. Now, where it gets intense is if you bring that person into your daydreams. So I've never done that with Taylor Swift, and I've never done that with a lot of other people that I would say I kind of understand them. So there is like a divide between, having a healthy parasocial relationship and having something that's really unhealthy, because you bring it into your maladaptive daydreaming, and I think it's not optional. It's just like whatever you maladaptive daydream for, you need somebody to fill that role. So for me, I did maladaptive daydream a lot about relationships, and I needed a particular, archetype really to fill that role, a particular celebrity. So I would like latch on to like one after the other, and I felt a real affinity for that person, but actually in my mind they were sort of the same character being recycled over and over, because I was just creating what I needed. And if you struggle with maladaptive daydreaming, you probably do struggle to connect with people in real life, and you might feel, I read this thing about people with OCD, is like when the OCD develops, they're not able to develop social skills around that time. And it's almost like this explained quite a lot to me. It was almost like you're emotionally stunted at that age, that you begin, in my case, the OCD and the maladaptive daydreaming, but it might just be the maladaptive daydreaming. If you start to give all your energy and emotion to your daydreams and to parasocial relationships, then obviously like there is just going to be like this wall up. It's going to be really difficult to have a real relationship, or feel real emotions, because it's like you can create these emotions, and there's a certain safety in creating these emotions. There's a certain safety in having a relationship with somebody who's not going to have a relationship with you back, who's not going to disappoint you, who's not going to reject you. I think for, people like us, it makes so much sense, and it's so obvious, like, why we would be so prone to having parasocial relationships. But I think, one difficult thing I think that stems from this is if you have a parasocial relationship with a particular celebrity and you're controlling what's happening in your mind, that celebrity is still doing things out in the real world, and that reality might clash with your fantasy, and that is when, things can actually feel really distressing. I mean, you can get very distressed because, things are not lining up and this person is not who you imagined them to be, and like, it kind of, it will impact your fantasy. And I struggle, although I make things up, I do struggle when something happens in real life and I need to kind of twist something in my own head. And, I have to sort of create stories around something that, I don't really like. And, it all happens really compulsively for me. Like, I can't, if that person is like the topic of my maladaptive daydreaming, like, I need to merge what's happening in real life into it sometimes. And that can be really kind of difficult. It is a really difficult thing because it's not just like a celebrity obsession. It's not just like being a fan of somebody. It's like, because we're prone to maladaptive daydreaming, you're thinking about that person all the time, and that person's always in your mind. And it kind of, if you actually told somebody like how often you were thinking about this person, you would be like, oh, this sounds insane. And that is the way it can feel. And that's just another example of why I think maladaptive daydreaming is so difficult to talk about, because again, it's embarrassing, and it's also, I think, celebrity obsessions and all this kind of like celebrity crushes, like, it's quite accepted in, childhood or when you're like a young adult, and then as you get older, obviously that becomes like more embarrassing. And I think that's actually why maladaptive daydreaming can be quite difficult to identify when you're younger, because you're sort of doing something that actually seems to be socially acceptable from the outside, but people don't actually know like how much it's going on in your mind, and like you can't stop it. But as you get older, there is a certain shame that's going to come from that, and I think that's why it takes people a long time to untangle themselves from the maladaptive daydreaming and realise like what they're doing is so unhealthy. Because when you're younger, there's a lot of things that are just more acceptable or make more sense. And then as you get older, I made a video about, whether you could grow out of maladaptive daydreaming or not. And one point I wanted to touch on that, which I forgot about, is that it's very difficult to grow out of maladaptive daydreaming, out of like the compulsion to do it. But what you might find is you might grow out of the topic of your maladaptive daydreaming, or the certain archetypes or certain people, certain situations that you keep creating in your daydreams that are just there by habit, and like you can't control it anymore, but you recognise like you're getting too old for this, or like, why is this not changing? You're kind of doing things in your head that maybe you've been doing for years, and you feel like you should be growing out of that particular topic. And what I've found from my experience is like my maladaptive daydream is really not growing up with me. It is more like what I read about the OCD is like I feel more stunted at that place where I began. And that is why, the older you get, the more distressing it gets in a sense, because it's like, oh, I haven't grown up, I haven't like developed, and it's quite obvious from the outside. I haven't had a relationship, as I've talked about in another video, and I kind of put that down to the fact that all my energy and I was like making relationships up in my head and I was playing those out. And obviously if have a ability to do that, like it is very difficult to just be like, okay, I won't have this, safe place. I won't have this thing where I feel very in control of it. I'll like go out there and feel rejected or, feel a struggle to even like be myself or like to be the self that's there in real life as opposed to the self that I can create. It is, I just wanted to talk about this because I think, it is a very challenging thing to deal with because, again, it's just so difficult to explain to somebody and it can feel really embarrassing. And I think, I don't know if everybody's like this, so like please do let me know, but I think we tend to just recycle the same obsessions and the same type of stories, like even though it would seem like they're changing, we're always kind of latching onto like that same type of celebrity or that, the same type of person who can fill that role. Like for me, that's what I've always done. And yeah, when the fantasy like clashes with the reality, it is very painful and it's very difficult. You're having all these emotions that you can't speak about, and I always found it so challenging. It's like, I really want to speak about this as though it's almost like a real relationship. I really want to tell somebody like the ups and downs and the highs and lows like I am having because of this person or because of what's going on in my head and like what I'm making happen. But I can't. It's you feel very trapped with all these big emotions, and I think that's what's so challenging about maladaptive daydreaming as well. It's like people, it sounds like, oh, you're just daydreaming in your head, like so what? But you're having a lot of highs and lows. You're having a lot of, your mind is giving you all these emotions. Your characters and your stories are taking you very high and taking you very low, and you don't get to kind of discuss that with anybody. It's kind of just like, oh, like I listen to a lot of people's like stories about their own relationships, and essentially I've got nothing to say because I don't have a real relationship. But it's kind of like, oh, you don't understand, like I'm going through all this that I've made up. And that's, it sounds kind of ridiculous to people who are, quote unquote normal and who don't struggle with this, but it feels very real to us. Like everything is so vivid, everything is so intense that we feel like these relationships are real and are very important to us, but there's no outlet for that when other people obviously have this outlet just to talk about like their real relationships. It's something I've found really, really challenging. And you can't just be like, right, I just want to talk about this celebrity all the time, kind of like the way that you're talking about your relationship all the time. Like people are not going to accept that. Like people will not listen to that. So, as you do feel very lonely in this because it sort of sounds ridiculous to other people, and I really think that's the difficult of this problem in itself, is that it's it sounds very childish or very silly to other people, but we feel things so intensely, but we're not able to discuss them. So yeah, parasocial relationships, it is a really difficult one. And what I would say, the parasocial relationships that I've had have really been like the trigger for me getting help because of things that actually happened in real life. Like I don't want to get into too much detail, but I think something, happened in that outside world, in the real world, that really impacted me and really impacted the parasocial relationship I was having at the time and like the world that I'd built at the time. And so my daydreams were turning very negative and, very depressing. And that kind of prompted me to be like, oh, this is ridiculous. This is just so And actually, you know, I had this thought. I was like, you know, if I were to tell someone that I have been thinking this thought for the last 4 or 5 years, they would be like, that's insane. And I would be like, that's insane. And then, you know, it clicked with me like, this is insane. Like, I really need help and really need to understand what is going on, because I can't control this. And that was really like the trigger for me getting help. I think, you know, at some point something will push you over the edge. And if you are prone to parasocial relationships, if certain things happen in the real world that have an impact on you, that might be the turning point for you. Like, I do think, you know, it can be very enjoyable and very comforting. I mean, that's something I think we need to acknowledge. And especially, you know, if we can't access these particular emotions in real life, then it's so, you know, it feels so good that we're able to kind of meet our needs in another way, like through our imagination. It's kind of is something that's comforting. But on the flip side, you know, it does take away from, you know, just living as ourselves and living in the real world and feeling and being able to feel things just as we are. Like, I was like living in this world that really like wasn't my world. And that does take a toll on your mind and actually on your body really as well, because you feel like so out of your body. So yes, I think parasocial relationships are probably a very common thing in maladaptive daydreaming, but as well, I know you can maladaptive daydream about people in your real life, like people maybe you do have a certain relationship with, but you kind of twist it in your minds. But I think, you know, celebrities, TV shows, movies, all this are very common. So, you know, please do leave a comment. Let me know how parasocial relationships kind of impact your maladaptive daydreaming, and, you know, what kind of impact that has on your life really, and how you feel about that. I would love to get people's views on this. Yeah, please do like and subscribe if you can. I'm going to continue to make more in this series. The thing about maladaptive daydream is like there's not a lot of people talking about it because it is quite a difficult thing to talk about. But I think there's lots of little interesting offshoots of different topics that relate to it. It really does impact your whole life and impact a lot of different things. So yeah, I wanted to kind of just talk about these things separately, and I'll continue to making videos on this. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.